This is Artifact 1 with Zach Lowe, Liz Pruka, Matt Gilligan, Cocktan, and Parker McCoy, and our topic is subculture. In culture, ideology controls your culture and conveys a rhetoric of common sense. So your culture controls what you think about and how you think about things. And the ruling class exerts hegemony over society by controlling ideology, which renders their ideology universal and controls how everybody else thinks. Since maintaining hegemony requires constant effort, hegemony is a moving equilibrium. Subculture uses style to challenge hegemony, and subcultural objects can be mundane, but they signify a refusal. So subcultural objects take on a dual meaning, which can be sinister in the eyes of the ideology of the culture, but within the subculture is a positive meaning. Subculture is defined as cultural variance displayed by certain segments of the population, and specifically subcultures are worlds within the larger world of our national culture. They aren't distinguished by one or two isolated traits, but instead fully developed cultural systems. So examples of subcultures are punk or goth, queer, or antisocial or rebellious. Subcultures use mundane objects which are outside the mainstream ideology to challenge mainstream culture. The term has been used to focus not only on the wide diversity of norms to be found in many societies, but on the normative aspects of deviant behavior. What had by the 1970s emerged as subcultures were understood to be groups of youths who practiced a wide array of social dissent through shared behavioral, musical, and costume orientations. Subcultures are generally born out of a conscious desire to be separated from some aspect of the parent culture. Specifically, such personality tendencies as frustration, anxiety, feelings of role ambiguity, and resentment are shown to be involved in the creation of subculture. Oftentimes, the creation of a subculture will bring a series of inverse or counter values opposed to those of the surrounding society in face of serious frustration or conflict. Queer subcultures, unlike the male-dominated youth subcultures that Hebdige, Hall, and other members of the Birmingham School have written about, are not located in an easy relation to so-called parent cultures. Essentially, many subcultures are born due to a sense of rebellion from the general culture, but queer subculture is unique because it was born in and of itself. Instead of active distancing from the parent culture, queer subculture is a more long-lasting, permanent way of life. Typically, many subcultures are known for their invisibility of female members and the tendency of girls to participate in co-ed subcultures only as girlfriends or groupies. Essentially, as the role of subcultures is oftentimes a rebellious one, it generally attracts males looking to separate themselves from the general culture. Punk, however, is one of the few places which attracted females as members, as the hardcore styles of many of the bands reminds us that punk in general, contrary to the usual accounts of the subculture, has always been a place for young girls to remake their genders. Subculture also relates to food, because culture and language determine how people value food, and people tend to value more cooked, less raw, and less rotten food. But Seattle punk subculture avoids more cooked, processed, and packaged foods and favors more rotten food from dumpsters to avoid waste. Popular culture increasingly accepts the shift away from processed foods and the shift towards organic, natural, raw food. Although Clark's counterculture community disparaged the costly production and marketing of packaged food, many members of the punk community would willingly eat the same packaged food salvaged from the dumpsters, where chain stores regularly discard edible unsold food. Essentially, for the sole reason that discarded food is considered taboo, members of the punk subculture considered it to be purified of its industrially cooked contamination.
The largest factor contributing to the rise of subcultures is that as subcultures reach mainstream media in either positive or negative light, they appear to expand. The inevitable glut of articles gleefully denouncing the latest punk outrage was counterbalanced by an equal number of items devoted to the small details of punk family life. With most subcultures and trends, there are always people who denounce it and those who support it. Regardless, giving attention to these subcultures continues to spread the values and characteristics of these subcultures, increasing the popularity of the subculture, and further incorporating it into the mainstream culture. Youth cultural styles may begin by issuing symbolic challenges, but they must inevitably end by establishing new sets of convention. What is at first strange, rebellious, and different eventually becomes accepted and even commonplace as traits from the subculture are incorporated into the general culture. The process of normalization and recuperation takes two characteristic forms. Firstly, the conversion of subcultural signs, such as dress and music, into mass-produced objects, such as the commodity form. And secondly, the labeling and redefinition of deviant behavior by dominant groups, such as the police, the media, and the judiciary. Each new subculture establishes new trends, generates new looks and sounds which feed back into the appropriate industries. Once removed from their private context by the small entrepreneurs and big fashion interests who produce them on the mass scale, they become codified, made comprehensible, rendered at once public property and profitable merchandise. The items of a subculture, toys, memorabilia, clothing, and popularity of subculture increases, inevitably becoming mass-produced, and start becoming commonplace objects. Having ostensibly neutralized early punk, the culture industry proved itself capable of marketing any classical youth subculture. All styles, musics, and poses could be packaged. Seemingly no subculture was immune to the gaze. So leveled, classical subcultures were deprived of some of their ability to generate meaning and voice critiques. This led to the stereotyping of subcultures and detracted meaning behind subcultures. The relative success of a few individuals created an impression of energy expansion and limitless upward mobility. This ultimately reinforced the image of the open society which the very presence of punk subculture, with its rhetorical emphasis on unemployment, high-rise living, and narrow options, has originally contradicted. Essentially, punk grew until it became what it had originally opposed. Subcultures typically stem from rebellion or dissent against the current subculture. These subcultures typically grow and evolve until they are incorporated into popular culture. The ideas of the subculture typically cause change in the views of society, at which point they have little to rebel against. This signifies a decline, as the ideas of the subculture not only become accepted, but often commonplace. A classic example of this is punk. So for discussion questions, firstly, do subcultures arise organically? And are they inevitable parts of culture? And are they necessary? What are examples of modern subcultures? How do they challenge the prevailing ideology? What objects and style do they use to do this? What are examples of popular cultural ideas or objects that once belonged to subcultures? How do these ideas enter mainstream culture?